Welcome to this training video for NPH, where we will talk through how participants will be asked to monitor their dietary adherence during the test diets and how staff can follow up and gather additional information and follow up with counseling as needed. So the daily log that participants will be asked to complete when they're on the test diets for NPH is called the Daily Diet Adherence Log, or what we call the DDAL. And this is a daily log that we will walk through in more detail on the next slide, but essentially this is a daily log that participants will complete where they report on all of the study foods they were provided and how much and which of those foods that they ate, and if they did not eat all of those foods, the reasons why they were unable to do so. And then they also have an opportunity to report on the intake of any non-study foods, beverages, and condiments, as well as the reasons for the intake of those foods as well. On the next slide, I would encourage you to watch the short video where we walk through what the DDAL looks like from the participant's perspective and the information that they are asked to provide. I think watching that video in advance of viewing the rest of this presentation will help the rest of this presentation make more sense for you. Okay, in this video, I'm going to take a few minutes to walk you through the daily diet adherence log that participants will be asked to complete each day. And so I want to walk you through this to get an idea for what this will look like from the participant's perspective and the information they'll be asked to provide on a daily basis. So here you see the participant-facing log that asks them that they'll receive each day, listing out all of the meals and snacks that they were provided as part of the study, and an opportunity for them to answer whether or not they ate each of these meals and snacks. So each day will be populated with the specific foods provided for that day. So the format will look the same each day, but the content will vary based on the foods provided. So in this example scenario, you see that the participant was given this breakfast meal, and they're asked to provide information whether or not they ate all of these foods. So if they say yes to this item, then that's great, and they can move on to the next meal provided for the day. If, however, they select no here, then there are follow-up questions that pop up for them to complete. And what it asks is for each of the foods provided within that entree, within that meal, how much of each of the food items they actually ate. So there'll be a slider bar here for each of the foods. They actually have to click on the bar to activate it in order to move it up or down to indicate how much of the food that they ate. So using this as an example, we could say this participant perhaps reports that they ate all of the egg in their breakfast. Again, they have to click on this to select they ate, we'll say, all of their sausage. And then the spinach, maybe they tried to pick some of the spinach out, so they slide that up here. They did not eat all of the spinach, and maybe the same for the bell peppers. They tried to pick some of those out. So what you'll notice is that even if there are some foods that they ate all of, if they answer no to this initial question, they have to respond in regard to each food item within the meal. And then they move on to this next question, if they did not eat all of their food, to ask why they did not eat. And there's a drop-down menu of options for them to choose from. We'll say here that they did not like the taste or texture. Then they move on to lunch, again, listing out all the foods provided. They can say yes or no. We'll say this participant reports eating all of their lunch food, which again means they move on and there's no follow-up questions to answer. And then that brings them to dinner, and here's their dinner meal. And similar to breakfast, we'll say, for the sake of example, that they did not eat all of these foods. They have to click on this to activate it. They did not eat really any of the bell pepper, perhaps. They reported eating all of the chicken. Say they ate all of the cashews. maybe they ate most of the cauliflower rice. And then again, the same follow-up question is why is that? And there's the choices, same as before. We'll again say they did not like the taste or texture. And then after the meals, for any snacks that were provided by the study, they'll be asked if they ate those. And similarly, there'll be follow-up questions if they say no, but we'll say in this case that they reported eating their snack. And then as you know, as and then they can also receive study-provided salt and pepper for their foods. And so if they did report eating or adding the salt or pepper to their foods, then they're also asked to report how much. So they can be provided up to 2 packets, but you'll see that there's a place here that they could select more than 2 if they did that. Same for pepper. And then after answering questions about all of the study-provided foods and beverages, there is an opportunity for them to report on any non-study foods or beverages they may have consumed. And so if they say no, then that's great, and they can move on to the next item. But if they report eating any non-study foods, there's a place here for them to report both what that item was and then also a drop-down menu of their reasons for eating that food. So just as an example, let's say that a participant reports having pizza, and here are the list of reasons why that could be, and maybe they were still hungry. Maybe they reported having a donut, and that's because they were craving it. And you can also, they should also report any condiments that they may have added to their foods or had here, and the reasons for that. So again, this can be as detailed as the participant chooses. If they provide an insufficient amount of detail, then staff may need to follow up at meal pickups to clarify a bit more detail on what all and how much of these foods were consumed. And then there's an item about whether or not they took any new dietary supplements or medications. Hopefully the answer is no, but if the answer is yes, then similar to the non-study foods and beverages, there's a place for them to describe what it was that they had taken, and then the reason for that new dietary supplement or medication. But here we'll say that they report nothing. And then finally, there's a place for the participant to provide any other information to study staff that they think may be helpful for them to know, and they can type in the free text box here any information. And then once they've completed this survey for the day, they'll click submit, and this information will be available to staff for review and to follow up with additional information as needed. And so this is what the checklist, the daily log looks like from the participant's standpoint. Okay, once participants have completed their daily diet adherence log, there are 2 scores that will be generated from the information that they provide. There will first be a score related to the study foods, and so this represents the percentage of the total foods provided by NPH that the participant reports eating, and this is derived by dividing the reported amount of study foods eaten in grams by the known weight of the foods that were provided by the study. So if you think back to the previous slide where we showed a walkthrough of the DDAL, you could see on the slider scale for each food, each meal and each food item, the amount of each food that the participant reported eating, and based on that self-report information, the study food score is calculated. So it is based on their DDAL reporting, and the scores are representative of a 0 to 100%, where 0 means they ate absolutely none of the study foods, and 100% is perfect adherence in that they ate all of the study foods provided. In addition to the study food score, there will also be a non-study food score, which is based also on the DDAL information, where participants report on any non-study foods that they provide, that they consumed. that they consumed. There are two elements to this that may require additional information gathering on the part of NPH staff. First, staff must determine and decide whether the foods, the non-study foods the participant reports eating, is dietary pattern compatible versus incompatible, which will be specific to each of the three diets. And then based on whether it is pattern compatible or incompatible will determine actually what goes into the scoring of the DDAL, which I'll describe in more detail in a moment. And then the way the scoring works for non-study foods is this is scored as items, where one item is representing at least one serving of a given food. And again, this will be based on staff determination, and we'll talk more about how that is done in just a moment. So the definition of diet incompatible foods really depends or varies across the three test diets. And rather than coming up with a comprehensive list of all possible foods that would be diet incompatible, which would be understandably unrealistic, instead there's general guidance, as you see listed here for the blue diet, on what would be considered diet incompatible. So for the blue diet specifically, diet incompatible foods that the participant would report would be things that are characterized by highly processed foods that are high in added sugar and salt, including some of the examples that you see listed on the slide. For the purple diet, things that would be considered diet incompatible include fresh fruits and vegetables, and any really foods that contain high amounts of fiber and plant polyphenols, as you see listed on the slide. And then finally, diet incompatible foods related to the orange diet would really be focused on carbohydrate containing foods, such as the examples that you see listed here. So it's important for the staff to determine not only whether the food, the non-study food reported by participants is diet compatible or incompatible, it's also important for the staff to determine the servings eaten of all of these non-study food items, because that figures into the adherence score, where one serving of a food is consistent with one food item, non-study food item. So how is that determined? Often this may require gathering a bit more information from participants based on their DDAL report. Depending on how much detail they've provided, it's up to the staff to gather enough information that will allow them to determine whether or not this represents a serving size which would equate to a study item. So how are servings determined? Well, they're based on the USDA MyPlate serving sizes, which are listed in a table within the MOP. And then also on the next slide, there's a brief table that illustrates this. So here you see the USDA MyPlate serving sizes for various food groups. This would be what staff would use to determine whether or not a non-study food represents an item or not. So all of this information is gathered to calculate the non-study food adherence score. So again, to recap, this reflects only diet pattern non-compatible items. So both diet compatible and incompatible foods will be assessed, information will be gathered, but it's only the non-compatible foods that figure into the adherence score. However, both compatible and incompatible non-study foods would be relevant for the counseling, adherence counseling promotion the staff could provide to participants. Again, the scoring is specific to the non-study foods that are diet incompatible. This is expressed as the total items over the 2-week diet period. And here you see an example on the slide for the Med-Dash diet, what a non-adherent food or adherent food could look like. So for the first example, you could see if a participant reported eating a non-study provided apple, this would be recorded as one medium apple, which is represents one item of that food, but this is pattern compatible, so this would not figure into the adherence score for this participant. In contrast, if a participant reported eating a bowl of cereal as well as a cup of whole milk with that cereal when they were on this diet, that would be scored as 2 items, representing the serving sizes for each of those foods. And these would be considered non-compatible foods. So in this case, this participant would receive a score of 2 for non-study food adherence. It's also important to keep in mind that while we encourage, when possible, participants to use the REDCap online version of the DDAL, we recognize that there may be some participants where that is not appropriate if they're unwilling, unable, or they're not feeling comfortable with using an online version of this form. Paper records and paper forms of the DDAL can be provided and should be encouraged for participants to complete. In this case, what would happen is participants would be given those records at food pickup, and then when they return a few days later, then staff would review those records on site and provide any additional questioning and information to gather details that may be needed for adherence counseling and for the scoring for non-adherence and adherence. It's also helpful to keep in mind that paper records could also be used as backups to online versions, or if participants really want to have a paper record as a point of reference as they go through their diets each day, that would also be permissible. It's important to note that there are a few situations where adjustments to energy intake may be required. So when participants pick up their foods every few days, they will also be weighed on site. And based on that information, if there is a change in weight, specifically a change of 2 kilograms or greater than 2 kilograms of weight change from the start of the diet period, then this would trigger some follow-up information to be gathered and a double checking of the energy calculations previously performed. So if a participant is showing a change greater than 2 kilograms in either direction from their start weight on the diet, then it would be helpful to gather additional information from them about their appetite. Have they been hungrier? Have they been less hungry? Probing for any issues about adherence, which hopefully would be obvious from the DDALs, but additional information may be warranted if that seems appropriate. It's helpful often to query about any changes up or down in typical physical activity levels that might be associated with this change in weight status. And then also double checking the energy calculations for accuracy. If based on this weight change, it seems apparent that energy adjustments are needed, then there's a couple of options staff can pursue. So there could be a change in the energy intake prescription using unit foods in 100 or 200 calorie increments, or depending on the level of weight change, it may be appropriate to change the participant to the next calorie level of that particular diet. And of course, in all cases, when energy adjustments are appropriate and made, it's important to account for this in REDCap and document this. So at each food pickup, the way this would play out is every few days a participant is going to come for their visit to pick up their meals. The kitchen staff are going to meet briefly with the participant to assess their adherence, and if there are any challenges with the intake of study foods or the intake of non-study foods, then it would be appropriate for staff to provide brief counseling at that time. So ideally, if participants are completing the DDAL online via REDCap, then prior to their arrival at the clinic to pick up their foods, staff would review the participants' DDAL responses in advance of that visit. That way they're aware of any adherence issues that they need to query, if they need to gather more information about the type and amount of non-study foods consumed, or to better understand any non-adherence issues with study foods provided. It's helpful to kind of know that in advance so that when it's time to meet with the participant, those issues can be covered and appropriate time allowed for that. So really, in essence, kind of a broad overview, there's really 3 areas for this visit where participants are picking up their meals. Number 1, you're reviewing their adherence from the past few days, particularly if there's any concerns related to study foods or non-study foods, and this allows the staff opportunity to gather additional information as needed. Then, based on the issues or the concerns with non-adherence, there's a collaborative discussion between the staff and participant, generating potential solutions to any adherence challenges that they're having, and then finally developing a specific action plan that can be reviewed to address the non-adherence over the next few days. So, what are the rules about discontinuation of the diet which may be due to non-adherence? Well, in this case, we really are following the same rules and regulations that are in place for discontinuation of the mixed meal tolerance test. So, the language that you see listed on the slide, which you can read, is pulled directly from the Manual of Procedures as it relates to the discontinuation of the MMTT, and the same rules would apply. In other words, if someone misses more than 3 days of meals over the 14-day period, then this would be a flag for likely discontinuation. There are situations where reporting non-adherence to the study team would be worthwhile to raise concerns or problem solve amongst the team a decision or an action plan about how to proceed with a particular participant. And some of those situations are listed here. So obviously, if a participant fails to show up to pick up their study foods, we have an adherence problem, and that definitely warrants a discussion among the local study team. If the participants' adherence scores are falling below 75% of study foods on 2 or more days of the week or pickup, or if there's an intake of non-study foods that are diet incompatible on 3 or more occasions, both of those situations would warrant a discussion amongst the team about how to best proceed. And then certainly if there's any unexpected or expected changes in the participants' life circumstances, unexpected events, stressors, change in schedules or routines or responsibilities that could impact their ability to follow through with the diet, then that would also warrant discussion amongst the team. So there are a few situations, although limited, where some slight adjustments in the diet may be permissible. Now, of course, the goal of NPH is to be consistent in the meals provided, and these are carefully prescribed to each participant based on their energy needs. But adjustments may be possible in some circumstances. When would that happen? Well, if, as we mentioned before, a participant shows a greater than 2 kilogram change in weight, then that may warrant an adjustment in their energy intake, either through unit foods or a change in the diet prescription. There's also a little bit of wiggle room on the beverages provided in terms of coffee and tea. So there is, within limits, a certain amount of coffee and tea along with the cream and sugar to go with those beverages that participants could have or not depending on their preferences, and those would be provided by the study and tailored to the request of the participants, again within the allowed parameters of how much of those would be offered per day. In addition to that, each participant will be allowed to have 1 diet soda per day if they choose to do so. That is not provided by the study, but that would be on their own to provide to themselves as long as it's 1 per day, and it is, of course, a diet soda. In addition, when participants are on the purple diet, there will be 2 options available to them for the regular sodas that are provided as part of the purple diet. And again, participants will have their choice of 1 of 2 colas flavors for the purple diet. And then finally, participants can have as much water, sparkling water, and flavored carbonated water as they want if that's something they would like to add to their usual intake and routine. In terms of a free foods list, for each of the 3 diets, there is what is called a free foods list that participants could use. This is not necessarily provided to all participants, but really on an as-needed basis, probably most often if participants report being really still very hungry, or there's maybe certain foods they really don't like on their diet, then in those limited circumstances, participants could be provided with the free foods list. Again, different versions of those for each of the 3 diets. And then on the last bullet, you see that there could be requests on a very limited basis to eliminate certain foods that perhaps the participant really does not like or is unable to eat. I think these situations will be rare and really have to be handled on a case-by-case basis based on how feasible it is to eliminate that particular food or replace it with something else that would still achieve the food and nutrient targets. In some situations that may be possible, in many situations that may not be possible, but we will work with the participants as best we can to make that happen, with the important caveat that meals should not be altered in the day prior to the DSMT. Okay, so thanks for your attention. This completes the training as it relates to the daily diet adherence log.